everybody. Thank you for joining us on virtual day trip to wine country presented by Citi. It's 7 o'clock on the East Coast and 4 o'clock here in the Russian River Valley, as you can see here in my background. I'm Sam Kimball from New York Wine Events. Today we are going to Sonoma County, California, about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. And as many of you who may be fans of California wine and Sonoma County in particular may know, Sonoma County is famous for so many things that it's hard to keep them all straight. Of course, they're probably most famous for their vineyards and the amazing wines they produce, wines that win gold medals in competitions all over the world. And we're going to a little tiny town in Sonoma County called Forestville, California, beautifully situated in Sonoma County's Russian River Valley, amidst rolling hills and a soaring redwood forest, lush vineyards. And Forestville is a tiny town that offers a lot of things to do. Their motto in Forestville, I'm told, is where the river meets the redwoods. But it may as well be where the river and the redwoods meet the vineyards, which is why we're going there. The road out of town takes you straight directly into the redwood forest and the Russian River area, and tucked away in there is the Russian River Valley appellation, or the AVA, American Viticultural Area. It's top vineyards and historic wineries. One of those wineries, I am really delighted to say, is one that we're visiting tonight, and that is Hartford Family Winery. And I got an alert here for everybody. This is a winery with a lot of 90+ point rated wines, a lot of amazing juice. It has a lot of history behind it. The family behind it has a lot of history in the industry, as you're going to see. And Hartford Family Winery has a unique calling card, and that is that they make single vineyard designated high personality wines. They like to call them, and you're going to hear more about this momentarily, high risk, high reward single vineyard wines. So remember that. We're going to discuss that shortly. To learn all about Hartford Family Winery, you can visit hartfordwines.com. I'm going to put up in my background here a slate that's got the URL of the website of the winery, and it also has some information. We've got a deal alert, everybody, $15 on flat rate shipping for 3+ bottles or more. You can mix and match. Just use the promo code NYWE21. So welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here with us this evening. We're really excited. This is going to be a great session. Please feel free to ask any questions along the way in the chat or in the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will answer as many of those as we can along the way throughout the session. And please, if you would, right now, hit the chat and let us know where in the world you are tuning in from. We'd love to see where everybody's based. It's kind of a unique night. It's Wine Wednesday, but it's also Winter Storm Wednesday all over the US. I hope that everybody is safe and sound and that you have electricity and heat. I know I have a few friends in Texas who are toughing it out down there. So stay safe, everybody, in this crazy weather. At New York Wine Events, we have worked with Hartford Family Winery previously, very recently, at the Zinfandel experience. And so it's really a pleasure and a privilege for me to host the co-owner and president of Hartford Family Winery, Haley Hartford Murray. Welcome, welcome, Haley. It is great having you with us this evening.
Thank you so much. Yeah, excited to be here and to taste with all of you guys tonight.
Well, you're wine royalty, so we're really in for a treat. And I want everybody, you guys, sharpen your pencils or sharpen your chat pencils, be ready with questions and anything along the way, Haley will answer. So Haley, tell us a little bit more about the winery. Many in our audience don't know it that well. What do you mean when you say, and I quote, high risk, high reward, single vineyard wines?
Yeah, so to sort of back up a little bit, my family started Hartford Family Winery in 1994, and from the beginning, we've had that focus of making single vineyard designated wines, which means wines from one little vineyard site, and sometimes we're digging into a specific block or small section of a vineyard that we think is showing really high personality or extreme personality, we like to say. And we liken it to sort of meeting an old friend. So if you had a friend in college who had this big booming laugh named Greg, and you were walking down the street 20 years later, and you heard that booming laugh 3 blocks away, you would recognize it. No, that was Greg. So these vineyard sites have these sort of calling cards to them, or personalities that are driven by the climate, their terroir, these little differences in the microclimate that create a really beautiful distinction in the wines. And so when you put your nose to the glass, we say it's like meeting an old friend. There's certain characteristics, whether it be, for instance, in our Stone Coat Chardonnay, we always find this really flinty, aromatic, and really beautiful white peach flavor profile to the fruit. So, those are things that we find vintage to vintage. And that we think are really exciting and unique. And so that's why we decided to explore this idea of single vineyard wines. And what we found over the years of working with these different vineyard sites is that oftentimes the most rewarding wine comes from vineyards that have the highest risk and in terms of growing. So we're looking for vineyard sites that are have really stressed soil. We like to say, character is, adversity builds character. And people, we think it's true for vineyards and wines as well. The more a vineyard struggles, the more concentrated and complex the flavor profile, the more dynamic it tastes. And so we're looking for these sites that we might in some years take the risk that we're not able to make a wine that vintage because it's just too cold, or it was too windy and all the fruit got wind burned basically. So for us, that risk is worth it because the reward is so high. When you taste these wines, they're very distinct one from the next. So yeah, that's what we mean with high risk, high reward.
That's a great answer. I actually, while you were talking, I changed the picture I have in the background here, which is an aerial photo of the winery. And in familiarizing myself with the Hartford Family Winery and specifically the Russian River Valley, one of the things I noticed, but I'd love for you to just, when you talk about, having it be harder for those vines to grow, and that's what builds character and makes the wine distinct. I noticed that it's so rolling. The hills are just, they're endless. There's not a lot of just wide open flat. Like Russian River Valley is it's bumpy.
Yeah. And I think, we have the most diverse, we have more different soil types in Russian River Valley AVA alone than all of France. So it's a really diverse region. All of the tectonic activity we have out here, earthquakes in California have created these beautiful rolling hills that are excellent for wine growing, and especially in Russian River Valley for growing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And we've over the years come to find also Zinfandel, which are the 3 varietals that we focus on primarily: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Old Vine Zinfandel. Because not only do you get this really incredible diversity of soils, which means that and we oftentimes try to grow up on hills or certain benches or hillsides because we find that those soils are less fertile, which is again better for growing great wine. If you want to grow table grapes, you want them to be big, plump, and juicy, full of water, and really tasty, burst in your mouth that way. When you're making wine, you want the berries to be super tiny and concentrated in flavor. So you want the soils to be stressed and those vines to be reaching down really deep in order to get at that water table and bring some really beautiful complexity to the flavors when you finally make the wine from those grapes. So so it makes Russian River a beautiful place for that reason, but also because The river itself, the Russian River, that cuts through the valley, creates a beautiful channel for all of that cold fog that sits off of the coast to come rolling in, especially during the fall growing season. You know, as the vines are, as the grapes are ripening, the hot inland temperatures suck in all that cold air and creates a sort of refrigerator overnight. So not only do you get this really beautiful complexity of flavors because of the stressed out soils that most of these vineyards are planted on, but you also get this really pretty retention of acidity in the wines. So it's a cool climate sensibility. So you get a really nice brightness to the fruit flavors. So Russian River is perfect for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in particular. Pinot Noir is sort of considered the diva of the wine varietals. It doesn't like it too hot. It doesn't like it too cold. It wants it just right. So Russian River is perfect for
Yeah,
that.
no, and I'm always telling people about how grapes, especially when they get a lot of sun in the day and they're just really worked up, they need to recover at night, and that cool air, you know, coming in with the morning fog is perfect for that. Now, do you guys irrigate, or are your vineyards dry vineyards?
We're mostly majority dry vineyards. You know, we have irrigation lines in them to get them established when they're really young. But for the most part, you know, unless it's a really extreme site where we feel like we need to be able to put a little water on them, the majority are dry farmed, and it's very sort of the exception to the rule if they're not.
So more of that, like those grapes really have to struggle to survive and grow and thrive, which is obviously what gives them all that personality.
Mhm.
So I mentioned earlier, for those of you watching, that Haley is part of the wine industry's sort of royalty, if you will. Haley, you know, your grandfather was Jess Jackson, the visionary California winemaker and founder of Kendall Jackson Winery. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about the family history and how that ended up playing into Hartford Family Winery getting started.
Sure. Yeah. So my grandfather is Jess Jackson, my mom's father, and he started Kendall Jackson in the early, vineyards were planted in the early '70s, mid '70s, and my mom actually, as a teenager, went up. It was supposed to be a retirement project for my grandfather. He, as we all learned, was very bad at retiring. He created about 3 new businesses in each of his efforts too. But in any case, he became very interested in wine and wine industry. And so prior to that, though, he'd been a lawyer actually. And my mom was very interested in following his footsteps and actually applied to law school. And she couldn't figure out at the time, because it was very early in the infancy of Kendall Jackson when it was really just a vineyard. She couldn't figure out why her dad kept saying, "Oh, go apply to business school. You know, you really shouldn't do law. It's not very exciting." When all her childhood, he'd encouraged her to practice and had her work in his law practice and all of that. But eventually, she just decided to pursue law anyway, and that's actually where she met my father. They met in law school, and they ended up dating all through law school. And shortly after graduating, though, Kendall Jackson had just started up and running, so my mom decided to, well, law is fun and all. It's really invigorating and of a pursuit, but wine, this is pretty cool and exciting. So she pretty quickly pivoted and got involved in the wine business. And it took my dad a little bit longer, but they were both very excited, of course, by all of the diversity of wine. And so when my grandfather approached them in the early '90s to see if they'd be interested in partnering in their own project with him, they jumped at the opportunity, and we're very, my grandfather and they were very interested in exploring wines, like I said, single vineyard personality wines, really boutique style of winemaking, and very limited production on these single vineyards. So I guess I haven't really touched on that yet, but because we're going into these really small sections of vineyards, even, the average case production for single vineyards is only 300 cases, 300 to 400. And we sell most of that direct to consumer out of our tasting room, which leaves, about 100 or so cases to spread around the rest of the world. So you'll find very little amounts and sort of tucked away here and there of our single vineyards. What we do is we end up selling a small portion, say our Velvet Sisters to New York, but maybe our Far Coast Pinot Noir to Florida instead. So it's sort of like a treasure hunt looking for each of these different single vineyards in different spots. But it makes it, I think, really fun, and it allows us to sort of introduce ourselves to new consumers in that way. So small production items, and a very different sort of focus than.
So, and let's just for everybody's benefit, dimension that for us, like compared to Kendall Jackson. I mean, how many cases of wine a year does Kendall Jackson produce, or at its peak does it produce, versus how many cases of wine does a Hartford Family Winery produce? Because it's a very big difference.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the great thing about Kendall Jackson is that we're still using all of those boutique winemaking styles. Most of for that size, but it's a much larger production. In order to distribute, nationally and even internationally, and in grocery and retail chains. Hartford, by comparison, our largest production item is our Russian River Valley tier wines, which are blends of multiple Chardonnay vineyards throughout Russian River, multiple Pinot Noir vineyards throughout Russian River. And those are only about 5,000 cases. So that's a little bit bigger, but even still, that means that you might find us in a really nice high-end restaurant at a by the glass pour, or on a really nice wine list, and then in really nice fine wine retailers. So it's just a different price point and different sort of focus.
Yeah, and I think we have a sophisticated audience of wine enthusiasts, and I think most everyone knows this, but I sometimes have to remind myself, oh, this wine is going to be a little more expensive. It might be a 40 or a 50 or even a $60 wine, but it might only be one bottle out of a total of 200 or 300 cases made. And, you can't sell those for $12 a bottle. I mean, because running a vineyard, and also in your case, you have a lot of wines that are super, super high quality, 95 points, 97 points. These are not wines that you find every day. So one thing I would just say to everybody watching is, if any of the wines strike your fancy, remember what Haley said. Most of the sales they do comes directly from their tasting room and their website, because there's not that much of these. So what grape varietals? You mentioned that you were focused really on 3. What are those again that you're really focused on?
Yeah, so Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Old Vine Zinfandel. Over the years, we started with just a handful of single vineyards that we were making. And now our sort of passion for finding these sites, and our winemakers' passion. We have 2 incredible winemakers, Tian Lorden and Jeff Stewart, who've both been with us for a number of years now. And they're incredible talents, but they'll go out, and look for, be looking for fruit and find these really incredible sites, and they'll bring it back to my dad, and my dad and I will taste it and we'll be like, oh shoot, this is so delicious and fantastic, we have to make another single vineyard. So over the years, we've actually started to produce over 30 single vineyards, and not just in Russian River Valley anymore, but we've expanded throughout Sonoma County, and then even as far north as Oregon. So today we're actually going to be tasting an Oregon Pinot Noir, and then as far south as Santa Barbara as well. And while we were down exploring in Santa Barbara in the last 5 or so years, one of our winemakers, Tian, is actually from South Africa originally and loves Chenin Blanc, and he found this incredible old vine Chenin Blanc vineyard. So we make a teeny tiny bit of that as well, which is really exciting too. But so we have a couple of other sort of smaller variety items that are, again, primarily D2C. But the majority of what we do is really Pinot Noir, then Chardonnay, and we have a handful of really beautiful old vine Zinfandel vineyards.
Got it. And I did put up in my background here another photograph, because I wanted to give people a sense of where we are in the world. Like, we're only an hour and a half north of San Francisco, but it's a very different pace. I mean, Forestville this is downtown Forestville in my background here.
Yeah, it's funny, you put that picture up. I had a girlfriend, I went to college down in Southern California, and I had a group of girlfriends come up on a road trip, and one of them had grown up outside of LA for most of her life. And she said the drive up, and it's not, again, it's not that far from LA, even eight or so hours of a drive. But it was her first time seeing a cow on her road trip up, and it was also the first time she sort of looked around the town. We went to this really great restaurant down the way called Willowwood, and it's all home, like polenta, piping hot polenta, and the best grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. So really homey sort of style cooking. So in one lane, the downtown of that little town, Grayton, which is next door to Forestville, is literally one block. So she was like, I didn't know I knew someone who lived in a place like this. And it was like, so it's, we feel really tucked away, although, to your point, San Francisco is only an hour, and it is really pretty diverse of an area in terms of its offerings and everything.
That's
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to know, like, you really do. So for everybody watching, I dragged Haley, was going to do the show tonight from her home, but it's remote enough in this part of Sonoma County that I had to say, Haley, you got to go into the winery because your internet connection is not quite strong
Yeah.
in the house. So, hey, hit us up in the chat, everybody watching, if you have actually experienced and tasted Hartford Family Wines. I know that we got a message here from Sid that he's a big fan of Hartford Family Wines, but if you've had those wines, also let us know if you're familiar with or have, I think many people have had Kendall Jackson, which is the precursor to this winery. So I think we're going to get started tasting wines. Haley, tell us a little bit about these 4 wines and how they kind of fit into your portfolio. And I know we're going to start with the Chardonnay and what vineyard does that come from, and let's jump into it.
Yeah, sure. So the first wine that we're going to taste tonight is our 7-Spench Chardonnay, which is a really beautiful vineyard actually within Carneros AVA, which is the only AVA that actually straddles both the Napa and Sonoma County borders. So it's an interesting AVA in that regard. And I figured, in order to give you guys a sense of where we are, maybe I will go ahead and share my screen. Let's see if I can do that now and pull up Google Earth. Sometimes it's sort of fun to explore it this way. So there's San Francisco, of course, and I will navigate to 7-Spench, which is in Carneros, as I said. So right here, just a little bit north of the San Francisco Bay. And a really beautiful vineyard. Again, you can't quite see the contours here, but really rolling hills here as well. And an interesting site because of the soils there. They're really stressed out, eroded clay loam soils. And personality in this Chardonnay. So and it's also a site that actually one of our winemakers, Jeff Stewart, helped to develop. He actually helped plant these vines in a different life at a different winery and over the years, we were able to actually purchase this vineyard years down the road. And it's really come into its own in the last couple of years. It's tasting fantastic. So one thing that I always find is really beautiful, sort of, that beautiful bright citrus sort of driven fruit. It's very cool climate here because it gets that fog off of the San Francisco Bay or San Pablo Bay, and that cool windy inlet temperature that drives that really nice bright fruit character. But then you also get really interesting sort of mango tropical notes on this wine as well. And then in taking a sip, it has, again, follows sort of through on that really pretty citrus fruit profile that you find in the aromatics. But then the texture and mouthfeel is really rich, has a sort of almost oily lemon oil sort of quality to it. and but also really balanced with some nice minerality too. So
Haley,
seven.
did you say, and I'm sorry if I missed it, did you say, is this, does this have oak aging or is this stainless steel only?
Yeah, so actually, all of our wines, every varietal, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Old Vine Sin, does see a little bit of French oak. We prefer French oak to American because we feel like it adds a little bit more of a nuanced character to the wine. And sort of our philosophy on oak is that, or in winemaking, is that what we want to show through first is that vineyard personality. So the characteristics that after making the wine for a couple of years, we've really come to feel our signature to that site. And so anything that we do in the winemaking process, we hope augments that or adds a layer of complexity and beauty to the wine, rather than overwhelming overwhelming what we've come to love most about those vineyards. So in terms of our oak regimen, we like a little bit of oak. We hope it adds that layer of complexity, that roundness and richness, in particular to the Chardonnays. But we don't want it to be the very, very first thing that you notice. So we actually have a really interesting barrel room too, which allows us to stack barrels too high. And then you walk down a long row of those barrels stacked too high, and then you go up a half story. You walk down another long row of barrels stacked too high, which allows our winemakers access to any barrel at any given time. Most production facilities, most wineries will instead store their barrels on barrel racks, where big metal racks where you stack them 20 barrels 20 high and 20 or 40 deep. And in order to taste the barrel all the way at the back and the bottom, you have to use a forklift. It might take you 40 minutes. So storing our barrels in this specific way allows us a real intimacy with what the barrels are doing, and allows us to experiment. So while we only use French oak, we have 25 different coopers in our barrel makers in our barrel room. And then within that, all different variations of stave aging. So how old the wood was before it was used to make the barrel, and toasting. So like your dark roast or your light roast on your coffee, for instance, same for a barrel. So all of that is to say that we sort of geek out on it, and we really want to make sure what we're doing is nuanced and again, adding that layer of complexity and beauty to the wines rather than overwhelming them.
You've convinced me. I've been thinking about doing one of our shows like this about the toasting of the oak barrels,
Yeah.
which is a process that happens at the barrel maker or the barrel manufacturer. In this case, in your case, in France.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting. And there's literally fires burning all over a facility, and they're toasting the wood that makes the barrels. And some are lightly toasted, some are medium, some are
really, yeah.
It's
it
really
is science. Yeah.
it's really, really interesting. All right. So with that, with the Chardonnay, what is your favorite dish or food to pair with that?
Oh gosh, that's always such a hard question for me, because I just love all foods. But I think, for this Chardonnay in particular, I love to pair Chardonnays with cheese. So I think a really nice goat cheese would be beautiful with this Chardonnay, actually. That richness to the goat cheese, I think, would cut through the really nice bright high tones to this, and with a little bit of like orange marmalade with it as well. So if you're more in a snacky mood, that would be great. Or seafood, I always love as well with this Chardonnay too. I think it adds a really nice brightness to that. It pairs well with like a ceviche, for instance. I think would be really pretty.
So for anyone interested in this particular Chardonnay, given that it is an oak aged Chardonnay, it's got a little more body. You're going to want to serve this one lightly chilled, not like freezing cold from the fridge. We have awesome input here from people in the chat. Kurt has had Hartford wines. They're special. They're delicious. Somebody else mentioned coming by and visiting, looking forward to coming back. I think it was Susan. Is your tasting room open? What's the status of reopening? What do you see in these coming months? I mean, obviously nobody has a crystal ball, but what's happening?
Yeah, ever changing, ever complex. But yes, we are open right now. We're really excited to be reopened. And we've, made the adjustments required to make the experience really wonderful. And it's still all outdoor tastings at this point. But we have we're really lucky in that we have a really beautiful outdoor patio, and the weather out here in California has been very temperate. So it's been in, at the coolest in the 50s in the middle of the day, which is really nice if you have a nice warm jacket, and we have our heaters up. So it's been really nice, and we'd love to see you guys out here if you're able to. But yes, it's been an adventure, as everyone has had navigating this whole process, I'm sure.
All right. So Susan, get your plane tickets. Come on out to Chicago. Hartford Family Winery is open. All right. So the next wine we're going to talk about is a rosé made from Pinot Noir. And as most of our audience, as they're knowledgeable wine people know, rosé is only made from red wine grapes. How long do the skins stay on these Pinot Noir grapes for this rosé?
Very little amount of time. So as you can see, on my screen, it probably appears more yellow than it does pink. I wish I had a white piece of paper to hold up behind it so I could prove that it was actually pink, but very little in terms of the way we make our rosés. There's a couple ways you can make rosé. One is saignée, which is basically you make a red wine, and as the red wine is just starting to ferment, you bleed a little bit of that juice off, and so generally that's a little darker in color, longer amount of time sitting on the skins. With ours, instead, we actually treat it like our Chardonnays. And put it through our bladder press, which is a really gentle way of pressing a white wine. And so you end up having very little amount of time. Basically, the wine only has as long as it's in that bladder press, which is an hour or two of contact with the Pinot Noir skin. So it's a very light pale blush, and goes into a stainless steel fermenter to chill overnight and get that we find that when you chill it and let it sit overnight, with those cold jackets on, basically cold bands to keep it nice and cool, you end up drawing out some more of those delicate floral and nice bright fruit profiles. So that's sort of how we treat it. And that's the color that you'll see in the bottle. But yeah, it's, I love this Chardonnay, this rosé. We always get everyone in the winery, our tasting room staff, our winemakers, all of our friends and family get super excited when we release this. It was just released. And so I did look into on our website. It hasn't actually made it onto the site yet, so I apologize, but it will be available for sale starting tomorrow morning. So if you would like to try it, I really would encourage you to go check online tomorrow morning once it's up there. But it's actually a single vineyard rosé, which we don't list on the bottle, but it's all from our Fog Dance Pinot Noir vineyard site. And it's a really perfect spot for growing Pinot Noir intended for rosé, because it's got this really beautiful, funky sort of grapefruit aromatic that's driven in this rosé. Lots of beautiful kiwi sort of character as well. It's bright, beautiful high tones of acidity, delicious with basically any oysters are always delicious with a rosé, I find. We've also done some really interesting pairings where we've, done like a salad with blood orange, and goat cheese on it. That turned out delicious with this rosé of Pinot Noir as well.
Yeah, but is great with rosé, and the other one that's great, a cheese that's particularly good with rosé, and you can find it in most like good cheese shops, is a cheese from Spain called Mahon, Mahon. Which is, and of course, rosé is awesome because you can drink it without eating anything, especially a dry rosé. So, what's the difference? Scott has a question. What's the difference of a single vineyard wine?
Yeah, so a single vineyard wine is a wine made from one single vineyard site. So one vineyard site, so a small section of a vineyard at times too, versus, for instance, we make our Russian River Valley tier of wines, which are blends of multiple Chardonnay or Pinot Noir or Old Vine Zinfandel vineyards. So our approach in making, for instance, our Russian River Valley tier of wines is we bring actually every vineyard in separately. We ferment it separately as if it was going to turn into a single vineyard. And then at the end of the fermentation process, our winemakers walk through our barrel room, and they basically taste all of the barrels, and they decide which barrels they think are working the best together to create a blend of those multiple vineyards, versus which barrels they think are have those really key characteristics of that single vineyard site and would be best suited for that single vineyard bottling. So that's sort of how we approach our blends versus our single vineyard wines. So for this rosé, for instance, it all comes from just that one Fog Dance vineyard site, which I might actually see if I can pull up again too. It's on Google Earth, just because it's a really pretty site as well. Let's see if I can navigate to it. So that's still the Sevens Bench, but here's Fog Dance, which is in Russian River Valley. And just a little bit south, if we go up, here's the town of Forestville. Our winery is right around here somewhere. Let's see, where are we? Oh, sorry, right there. And so if you go just a little bit south, you reach Fog Dance Vineyard. And as you can see right here, there's a really beautiful little creek that runs alongside it, which adds a really wonderful cooling effect. And how fog dances in every evening and then back out every morning, which makes it a very cool climate, beautiful site, great for growing really beautiful citrus-driven rosé of Pinot Noir.
So now, speaking of Pinot Noir, the next wine is the 2017 Warrior Princess, but that's from Pinot Noir grapes from Oregon. Am I right?
Yes, that's right. So we started making this wine, gosh, I'm sort of estimating, but about 5 or so years ago, I think now, maybe a little closer to 4. And again, this is sort of a passion project. Our family invested in a little bit of Pinot Noir vineyards up in Oregon, about 5 or so years ago. And when we started exploring, yes, it's actually, it's Eola Amity Hills, AVA. So it's a single vineyard Pinot Noir, and actually a little block. So the vineyard itself is named Zina Crown Vineyard, which has been made by other producers as well, that are beautiful examples of that vineyard site. And we use a really small section of it that is sort of on the crown of that that hill of that vineyard site. And there's this crown of trees up at the top of the hill. So we use this one little section that's sort of down to its east. And it's just a fantastic vineyard, and I think we love whenever we name a single vineyard, we like to tell a little bit of the story of the place or the people that were involved in it. And in this case, it's a reference to, Warrior Princess herself, Zina, the Warrior Princess. I think my dad and I watched one too many of those shows when I was growing up. He likes to joke that, it was one of the only shows that, I really liked, that he could get behind as well. I liked the little blonde sidekick that was kicking butt. He liked that they were just in short skirts. My mom liked it too, go feminine power. But anyway, so it was very crowd pleasing for the whole family, but we couldn't help ourselves when we saw the Zina Crown Vineyard name and wanted to tell a fun story. But it actually suits the wine in a lot of ways, because our winemaker Jeff likes to call this wine the velvet covered fist. It's got some really beautiful power. It's but it's also sort of wrapped in these really beautiful velvet sort of driven tannins. So in terms of flavor profile, it's a beautiful contradiction in my opinion. You get really interesting earthy aromatics like sandalwood and violets, and then it follows through with really pretty sort of boysenberry, and red cherry driven fruit. And then it ends with this really interesting sort of juniper, again, earthy sort of, herbality on the finish, which I think is just really intriguing. It's a very complex Pinot Noir, and like I said, it's got big tannins, but they're sort of wrapped in that velvet sort of softness. So really nice
Yeah,
Pinot Noir
that's
that I always.
interesting, 'cause for a lot of Pinot Noirs don't have a lot of tannin or don't have big tannins, and so that this makes for a very distinct selection here with this particular one. Sid has a question about the grapes. What clones of Pinot Noir are doing best in those Jory-based soils in Willamette in Oregon?
Gosh, that's a question for a winemaker.
You
I should know more about.
because that was a technical question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question though, and I'll have to circle back with Sid on it. So I would love to get that information to you. But yeah, no, I mean it is a beautiful growing region, and the soils drive a lot of that personality, and you do need to find the right clone to work in that given soil, so that the vines will be strong enough to withstand the adversity that they're facing, basically.
Yeah, and then for the wine intermediates like me, it's worth reminding us that Oregon and Willamette Valley in particular is just a tremendous region and producer of Pinot Noir. So you guys weren't just being capricious and deciding to get some Pinot Noir grapes and from Oregon and grow them and make wine. It is a world-renowned source of great Pinot Noir. That's probably what Oregon wine is most famous for.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is a beautiful region. And one of the only reasons that we felt so confident in making a wine from so far away. And what we actually do is we pick the grapes in Oregon, and then we ship them overnight in refrigerated trucks down to the winery, and they arrive first thing in the morning so that we can process them while they're still nice and cold. But we felt confident in doing that because we have this incredible vineyard manager named Ken Kupperman who lives up in Oregon. And I joke that our winemakers sort of have a man crush on him. I think it's reciprocated. He always wears his little Hartford hat whenever we come to visit him out there. But he's incredible. His vineyards, you walk through them and they look like a manicured, French garden. They're just immaculate and gorgeous. And so there was never any concern about whose hands they were in, even though we're a little bit more distant than some of our, for instance, Russian River Valley vineyards. The fruit is just always beautiful when it arrives. So.
It's a great region. Hey, everybody, let us know in the chat if you are fans of Pinot Noir from Oregon. So from Pinot Noir, let's move to Zinfandel, which is kind of the home team favorite grape of California. One of the most underrated, I would say the most underrated wines in America are the incredible red Zinfandel wines that come out of California. And of course, we know you, Haley, through the Zinfandel experience and some amazing events that producers like you guys are involved with in. So this is an old vines Zinfandel that you're about to talk about.
Yes.
And I would like it if you would, primarily for me, just educate us on why are first of all, how old are old vines? And number two, why are old vines important or valuable? Why does one want old vines?
Sure. Yeah. So, old vine isn't regulated. The term isn't necessarily regulated. You can't lie and call a 4-year-old vineyard an old vine vineyard. But that being said, it's, there's not a specific age assigned to the term when you put it on a label. But what we mean when we put it on a label is over 100 years old. And actually, the Fannuchi-Wood road that we're tasting today, and most of the single vineyard Zinfandels that we make are now closer to about 120 years old. They were planted by Italian immigrant farmers that moved into the Russian River Valley, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and really beautiful vines, but definitely a labor of love. And And one reason we prize them so much is because the vines are really struggling to get just a couple clusters ripe. And if you think about Zinfandel in its youth, Zinfandel is actually a pretty vigorous vine. It likes to shoot out a bunch of clusters. So you sort of have to wait until they're pretty old in order to get that really nice concentration of flavor, more complex fruit profiles. And I find really interesting herbality on our old vine Zinfandels. The Fannuchi in particular, I always get this really interesting sort of fennel or aniseed aromatic in the nose underneath those sort of other spice characters that you would look, and find typically in a Zinfandel, like white pepper, allspice. But so sort of to back up a little bit too, when my parents first started Hartford, they didn't actually think we'd be making Zinfandel. They thought we'd be focusing on the Burgundian varietals, or the more noble varietals, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. That was sort of the direction that my grandfather, Jess, actually wanted to drive the business in as well. And certainly being in Russian River, as we've talked about, it's excellent for growing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But the first home my parents purchased in Russian River was this little ranch house that had a 100-year-old vineyard in the backyard. Tiny little vineyard, only 8 acres. And after working with the fruit in the vineyard for the first couple of years and crying every time they said goodbye to their little baby grapes at the end of the harvest, when they sold it to another producer, they said, well, what the heck, let's just try making it ourselves. And so we ended up from the very beginning, falling in love with the varietal even more, and finding, sort of creating this cult following for our Zinfandels. Right off the bat, they received some of the highest acclaim. My dad likes to tell the story of how our winemaker at the time, our very first winemaker for Hartford, came to him and he said, Don, I think I made the best wine I've ever made. And he's like, oh, great. What Pinot Noir is it? And he's like, no, it's the Zinfandel from your backyard. It's just incredible. And my dad, sort of kicking himself because, my grandfather at the time really didn't want us to focus on Zinfandel. He wanted us to become known for our Chardonnays and Pinot, which over time we did, of course. But it's always had little, incredible accolades from critics as well as from, our fans. But there, over the years, we've sort of come to feel that there's really 3 things that make our Zinfandels really distinct from other producers. And the first is that age of the vine, which we've already talked about. You get this really interesting, complexity of fruit profile, flavor profile, as well as concentration, because like I said, it's really low yielding vineyards. An average vineyard might be producing about 4 tons an acre, up to even as much as 6 tons an acre. The Zinfandels that we farm at 100 years old, dry farmed, are only producing, a ton to 2 tons an acre if you're lucky. Some years it's only a half a ton. So really, really low yielding sites. But in addition to that, really complex concentrated flavor and fruit profile, you end up, because we're in Russian River, and it's a really cold growing region for Zinfandel, which we think is the second most important thing about our Zins. And, that cold Russian River Valley climate creates a really beautiful brightness to the wines. So instead of getting that more jammy, plum, blackberry jam sort of fruit profile, it's more like a fresh picked blackberry or fresh picked raspberry. And so you get this really nice lift of acidity that helps to balance how big the wine is otherwise, and creates a really beautiful, elegant style of Pinot Noir. And then the last thing that we think is important about our Zins is that we use Pinot Noir winemaking techniques. So we treat the grapes a lot more gently than you would say a Cabernet or a Bordeaux varietal. Cabernet, which, and you might think, that, and I think a lot of early producers of Zinfandel thought that you could treat a Zinfandel like a Cab. But Zinfandel is actually relatively thin-skinned of a varietal, more like a Pinot Noir than it is a Cabernet. So you end up, when you rough up a delicate skinned varietal, you end up shearing those really delicate skins and creating shorter tannins, which creates a more rough, rugged mouthfeel in the wine. And we think about mouthfeel a lot at Hartford, and my dad jokes, we're moving the needle from burlap to linen. Maybe we don't get all the way to velvet, as you would hope for with a Pinot Noir, but it's that effort of treating the grapes in the winemaking process more gently that we think drives a little more elegant style of Zinfandel. So in any case, those are.
So this is a really like, for a Zinfandel, has a smoothness, almost a silkiness from what you're saying. But this is a big wine. I mean, this is a wine. What would you pair it with food wise?
Oh gosh, it could be paired with anything from, and Fannuchi in particular, it is probably the biggest structured of the Zinfandels we make. For instance, Dina's tends to be even more bright. Jolene's tends to be a little bit softer, more like dark chocolate and violets. The Fannuchi is probably, if you want to use the term, more masculine style of Zinfandel, a little bit bigger tannin, and so it definitely can stand up to ribs, or like we have every once in a while, every year historically we've had a Zinfandel barbecue party that we do, and so any style of barbecue is great with Zinfandel, but beyond that too, steaks. And with that sort of softer mouthfeel, though, on this whole spectrum of the world of Zinfandel, you could still have it with something like pork or even chicken, and have it be really beautiful and delicious.
I'm a sucker for Zinfandel, so I'll drink it. I'll have it with anything. Stephanie has a question about the ABV, the alcohol by volume of this Zinfandel.
Yeah, so it's right behind me, so I'll double check, but I think when you taste it, you would be surprised, because again, it's not a shy Zinfandel. None of our Zinfandels are shy in terms of ABV, but it's also really much in balance. So it's all big, but it's big and balanced. So it's actually a 15.2 alcohol. So which again, it's not shy, but it's got this really beautiful brightness to the fruit as well, which means that you don't notice it quite as much as, say, some other Zins out there.
I mean, I'm all about the flavor profile and the structure and the mouthfeel, but at the end of the day, the ABV can be high as long as it's, absolutely perfect with whatever I'm pairing it with. Right. As some people know watching, I'm a big fan of Zinfandel from California. That is awesome. So let's go back to to look at what everybody can take advantage of here. We do have, and you'll see it on the screen here at hartfordwines.com. If you get 3 bottles or more, it's $15 flat rate shipping, which, as most people know, is great from California to anywhere in the US that Hartford ships to. I think there's a small handful of states that you cannot ship to, and that nobody can ship to, in fact, like Kentucky and Mississippi and Utah. Come on, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Utah, you guys got to get with the program. But these are really beautiful wines, and if you're interested, take advantage of them. Are these 4, Haley, do they fall into the category of they really only are available through the winery? I mean, you might find them in a shop near Forestville, or are these ones that are in wide distribution?
Yeah, so like I said, you will find pretty much each of our single vineyards out in the market, but it's difficult to find. You won't find them in every market. So it's again like a treasure hunt. So depending on where you live, you might be able to find a little bit of the Fannuchi, for instance, in your market, but it won't be distributed all across. So your best bet is looking for it in the tasting room, and the Rosé, again, each of these actually are all about 400 cases, and it's listed, the case production is listed on the back of the bottle. For instance, the Fannuchi was 306 cases this year, and for 2018, and the Rosé, like I said, is a single vineyard Rosé, so it's very small production as well. It's about 400 cases too. So you might find them, but it would be, you're going to be looking for a little bit before you do.
Right, and that rosé is really a nice value too for a
It
single vineyard
is,
one.
yeah, which, and our tasting room staff in particular is always begging us to make just a little bit more. And we have eked up the production just slightly over the years, but basically we're using Pinot Noir grapes that would otherwise go into our single vineyard Fog Dance Pinot Noir site vineyard, which is, same viticulture practices, same, in terms of how we farm, all that high touch that goes into producing them. But instead, of going into a $65 bottle of or $70 bottle of Pinot Noir, it's going into a $30 bottle of Rosé. So it definitely is a value, and is absolutely delicious. So I hope you guys will take advantage of that one in particular. But and it was, like I said, it'll be just newly released tomorrow. So.
That's great. So it'll be, so the rosé will be on the site tomorrow. Actually, Nancy was asking about it in the chat.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So there's a question from Norman. Since Zins are really Primitivo varietal from Italy, yeah, they are kind of based on that varietal from Italy. Are you required to call them Zinfandel? Good question, Norman.
Yeah. So in my gosh, I probably should beef up my knowledge again there, but yes, I think Zinfandel grapes grown here in California, should be called Zinfandel grapes, and I think that they've changed a little bit over the years, and my understanding too is that their origin is actually, is it Czechoslovakian or Czech Republic?
Croatia.
Croatia, sorry, thank you. And so it's I think although the genetic identity is pretty much identical, it's been grown and known as California Zinfandel for so long as well that really, in terms of marketing, it makes the most sense to still call it Zinfandel.
Yeah, so. That's right. And in fact, but it's a great question, Norman. The Primitivo grapes are from that side of Italy, the eastern side, which is on the Adriatic Sea, I believe. And that separates Italy from Croatia and Serbia and Greece. They have tons in Puglia, which is the heel of the boot of Italy. They have tons and tons of Primitivo. It's everywhere. And in fact, there it has to be called Primitivo. We interviewed a winemaker who's based there in Puglia, who's a fan of California Zinfandel. He brought some vines, some clones back in his suitcase from California about 20 years ago, and he planted them in Puglia. He calls the wine he makes from those Zinfandel, but technically in Puglia, they're Primitivo grapes. So that's a great question. And also a couple of other quick questions. So yeah, Nancy, just to confirm, Haley says that the rosé will be on the website as of tomorrow. And the promo code is good for how long, Haley?
It'll be good, I think, until the end of or beginning of March. Sorry, the very first of March.
We have a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Another question from Jennifer. How far are you from Santa Rosa?
We're only about 10 minutes from Santa Rosa. So yeah, we're just around the corner. And like I said, it feels like, you drive along the Russian River, you drop down into this little valley that we're in, and are surrounded by redwood trees out here at the winery. So you feel really remote, and it's, again, as you described, Sam, a very bucolic sort of area, but you're really not that far from civilization in a bigger city like Santa Rosa is.
That's awesome. Well, Haley, thank you so much. This was an education in one sitting, and it was great. And I think that people appreciated learning about Hartford Family Winery. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you guys soon, and hopefully we'll get Haley back. Maybe Haley will get you back to do a food and wine pairing where we have like an interactive session.
That would be wonderful.
And for those of you watching, we are back next Wednesday. We're going to be back with Tuscany. We're going to Tuscany. We're going to taste Chianti Classico with an Italian prince. So make sure to check that one out. Haley, thank you again. Everybody stay safe in the storm, and we'll see everyone soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Have a great night, everyone.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.